So for those that don't know, as a Catholic, I'm supposed to forgive everything. Every time. So before I begin, let me just say that I forgive Brian Holdsworth, the bearded wonder, but here's the thing, and I'm going to be a little unfriendly today. There's nothing wrong with a little correction. And even though I forgive Brian Holdsworth, I still know for a fact that he's wrong. For those who don't know who I'm talking about this man right here. I gave him a reply from this video where he's defending the Inquisition. And I replied with this: wow, you are a shill and an idiot. If you were not speaking from a script, I would call you ideologically possessed. I, as someone who is glad to be Catholic and openly defends his faith on YouTube and actually debates against atheists and anti-theists from a much smaller channel, I call you a coward for making this video. I can show you Jewish names list that include my own family, that show who were forcefully converted during the Reconquista and the Inquisition in Spain as part of the Sephardic diaspora. What's next? Are you going to defend how the Spanish conquistadors treated the Native Americans and the Mesoamericans? And he gave me a response, believe it or not, that was quite measured. He said, "I'm sorry you had such a negative reaction to the video. The thing is, I made a specific case based on arguments. There's a lot that you could correct, assuming it needs it, without resorting to a level of hostility that undermines your claims of being a thinker and debater." My claims to being a thinker and a debater. Anyone out there who doesn't know my channel and doesn't know me, I'm a fighter. That's what I am. First and foremost, I am a fighter. I like thinking too, but I'm a fighter. And I'm definitely going to fight today. I'm going to go through bit by bit on his video, just like I do on all my other stuff, where I won't show his picture, but I'll listen to his audio and I'll have my commentary. But first we got to lay down some groundwork. And just so you're clear, the references I will be using for this first base level groundwork is the Times, is Time Magazine, the Times of Israel, Jewish heritage sites, Wikipedia, and the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay? I'll also be using some other sites, and I'll list them down below here. All of them are legitimate Jewish heritage sites, including something very dramatic that I will show in a second. So, what is the Spanish Inquisition? Well, it was around 1478, instituted originally by Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella of Castile, but eventually it was given permission by the Pope. According to modern current estimates, 150,000 people were persecuted for various offenses in the 3 centuries during the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition was meant to identify heretics who converted from Judaism or Islam into Catholicism. It was aimed at Jews and Muslims. Just to be clear, it would also go after homosexuals and those who got married incorrectly, whatever that means. It started in November the 1st, 1478, and it ended on July 15th, 1834. There were 21 tribunals held under the crown, and it affected specifically the Portuguese and Spanish empires, or the Castilian Empire, and Mexico. So yes, it did affect the New World. It did come here. And it did affect both sides of my ancestry, both my mother's and my father's. For those that don't know, my mother is Native American. My father is Sephardic from Spain. The basic premise here is that the Spanish Inquisition gave the Jews 3 choices: convert, leave, or die. Those are the choices that were given. My family converted, by the way. We'd be called conversos, which is actually kind of a slang, dirty word. But what the Inquisition was trying to ferret out were false conversos, were those who only said that they converted, but really they were crypto Jews or crypto Muslims. So really all the Muslims weren't really allowed to stay. It was really going after the Jews. It was basically an anti-Semitic movement. The numbers are hard to understand, but anywhere between 800,000 or 300,000 Jews were persecuted and pushed out or expelled from their homes in Aragon and other parts of Spain, North Africa, and parts of Europe, making them have to migrate into the Ottoman Empire, where they would later be persecuted by the Muslims. So thanks for that. That was a good move. Good move. While on the other hand, something they got a lot of correct convictions on was sodomy. The numbers are hard to get exact readings on, but homosexuals were caught being gay. And, well, you can guess what they did to them. They also went after bigamy and unnatural marriage. I do not know what unnatural marriage is, but there you go. Whew. Okay. And torture would be used when there was sufficient proof of culpability. They would mutilate, maim, draw blood, and cause permanent damage to the body. These are their words, by the way, not mine. But they would not torture the young, the elderly, or the injured, and pregnant women were thankfully spared from this horrible crime. No more than 2 to 8 times of torture were allowed. 2 to 8, depending on which period we're talking about. And also their lands and property were confiscated, of course. Now the numbers do differ. Sometimes we can see up to 826 executions and 778 people burned at the stake or burned at effigy. So, yeah. Out of 44,000 cases, 44,674 cases, 826 were executed and 778 were burned alive. Oh, but it wasn't that bad. It had good reasoning behind it, I'm sure. Oh, by the way, if you think I'm just reading random, this be the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay? Before you think I'm just being a conspiracy nut. Originally, it was meant to keep out the Moors, but it eventually became an anti-Semitic movement to go after conversos, as I said. This were considered an act of faith. Basically, about 2,000 people were killed during these events, and about 160,000 Jews were expelled, and about 300,000 were expelled altogether totally. 14 tribunals, as I said, and eventually it ended. All right, so let's see what My Jewish Learning, which is a website, by the way, has to say on this. Jewish life in Portugal and Spain, Sephardics, which I'm part of, had a lively culture during the Middle Ages, but then it became officially non-existent as they were expelled by 1492. Anyone who stayed were forcefully converted by 1497. These were officially known as conversos. Many of them, though, still practice Jewry up till today. Many practices in Hispanic culture are actually Jewish practices. We just don't know it, such as the evil eye, the egg, all that stuff comes from Judaism and Kabbalah, and even in my Sephardic prayer book, there's a prayer about the evil eye in there. So these traditions carry over. We think they're Hispanic traditions, but they're actually not. They don't have anything to do with our Native American ancestry. They actually have everything to do with our Jewish ancestry. After the forced migration of the diaspora from Spain and Portugal, many Jews had to either convert or starve to death, basically. There was no official enforcement of the conversos, though, so they were generally free to practice in their Judaism secretly. During the early 16th century, these crypto-Jews, which are called marinos, which, by the way, is still what we're called today. That's what my grandfather was called, by the way, which literally means swine. And that's the Christian term for us, by the way, was swine. By those of pure Christian lineage, pure Christian like maybe an Irishman, with some red hair and some pale skin. Entered many levels of Portuguese and Spanish society. They forged groups and identity on account of the conversion as a complete group. They maintain resilience and vitality, but the introduction of the Inquisition, specifically in Portugal in 1536, spurred on waves of crypto-Jewish immigration into the New World, meaning America, which is how my family came here. The pressure to flee from persecution was compounded with a search for greater economic opportunity. Ironically, for many conversos, they first moved to Spain as it was offered greater wealth, but eventually with that Inquisition, they could no longer practice their faith, so they ended up coming to other places. Jewish migration was so extensive that for many Jews, Portuguese became a synonym for the word Jew. Anyway, you get it. They come to the New World. Welcome to the West. Okay. Maybe I'm hitting this too hard. Let's check out what Jewish history says. And this is going to be from Wesleyan College. Okay, so this is a university. Let's see. Spanish Jews migrated from the Iberian Peninsula well before the expulsion of all Jews in 1492. But the massive migration at the time of that expulsion that created the foundations of the commercial, kinship, and cultural network known as the Sephardic diaspora. This diaspora was maintained over centuries, but changed dramatically over time. The expulsion of 1492 was one of the most traumatic events of medieval Jewish history. The Jews of Spain were taken by surprise by the expulsion decree, which, by the way, I actually have that, and I'm going to show you an image of it later, that they were given only a few months to leave the Spanish kingdom. By the end of August, there was no openly practiced Jew on Spanish soil, outside of the tiny kingdom of Navarre. Many baptized Jews, or descendants of baptized Jews, known as conversos, remained in Spain. In time, they too, though, came to be part of the expansion of the Sephardic diaspora. The radical measures were adopted in large because of the ambiguous religious character of the converso population, which, following mass riots in 1391 against Castile and Aragon, this led to an onslaught of forced baptism and a stripping of culture. The Spanish Christian society did nothing to help assimilate these new Christians. Instead, they used derogatory terms such as purity of blood and giving them a status of new Christian, and ethnically impure, such as calling Jews the killers of Christ, or Christ killer, or Christ killers. Okay. So that page is turning my stomach. Let's try another one. Okay, let's try another site. Okay. So here we are at Jewish Virtual Library. Maybe this one. Maybe this is the website, Brian, that tells a different story. The story that you told in your video. This is the one. Right? You said for me to respond to you with evidence that would prove your video wrong. So that means that you're sure that I'm going to find evidence that proves your video right. Let's see. The Christians conquered Toledo in 1098. The Jews and Christians in Spain prospered, while those in Muslim Spain suffered under the Almohad dynasty. Both Jews and Muslims were involved in the cultural, economic, and intellectual, financial, and political life of Christian Spain. By the 13th century, the Christians controlled most of Spain and increasingly forced Jews to convert to Christianity. Those who converted became known as Marinos, or sometimes, less pejoratively, New Christians. These Marinos were also called crypto-Jews because they taught their children and practiced Judaism, or Jewish practices, in secret. During this period, Jews were forced to participate in religious disputes with Christian counterparts. Anti-Jewish riots broke out, especially in 1391, in several Spanish cities, and the situation worsened for the Jewish community. New Christians were tortured and killed by the Spanish Inquisition, especially during the 15th century. Father Thomas de Torquemada felt that if the Jew remained in Spain, then they would influence the new converts to Christianity. After the capture of Granada from Muslim forces, Father Torquemada convinced King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella that the Jewish community must be expelled, and in 1492 Isabella and Ferdinand commanded that all the Jews who refused to convert be expelled. The Jews were given 4 months to leave and were forced to sell their houses and businesses at low prices. It is estimated that 1,000 Jews left Spain at this time. The expulsion from Spain is commemorated every year by all Jews by the holiday of Tashbava. I don't speak Hebrew, so. Many Spanish Jews settled in Portugal, although this was a bad plan, as we read about earlier. And by 1497, they were expelled as well. Here's an interesting little fact. In Portugal, only 8 Jews were expelled. The rest converted under duress. So, good news, Brian. If you were looking only at the Portugal history portion, only 8. I mean, if you're looking at Spain or in Mexico, you got thousands dead. But if you're looking in Portugal, only 8. Good for you. Good for you, Portugal. That being said, the rest of the very large number of Jews who were expelled and ended up having to search for homes in Greece and Turkey, where they would later be killed by the Muslims. Oops, again. Anyway, the Marino diaspora later took place in Mexico, where in Latin America many crypto-Jews settled and lost their connection to their heritage but continued their practices without knowledge. Many crypto-Jews live today in the Rio Grande Valley, in Colorado and New Mexico. Nope, still not finding. Uh-oh, but what's this? Oh no. Oh, look what I found, Brian. Brian, I'm so sorry. Look what I found. It's the paper. It's the paper that says you're wrong. It's the paper that they sign that let them kill people and torture people because they weren't Catholic. Not because they weren't Christian, because they weren't Catholic. Ooh, what are you going to do? Anyway, this document that I just showed you is what started the whole movement. To think that you only had 3 months to convert and change your entire life and system or flee. It's very powerful and scary. Powerful documents. And this is just one of them. There are crucial images that show exactly what happened. I think it's essential, again I'm quoting here, I think it's essential reifying an identity through documents and artifacts of history. From the moment in 1492 when the writ of expulsion was issued, a chain of events started that will bring people ultimately to Mexico, or to New Mexico. Now, he talks about just how emotional it is when he's doing the research, reading through the paper, when he's actually reading through the documents of the people who were tortured and killed and reading about their lives, how he can, even now, after being in charge of this exhibit, how he can't help but cry. This grown man who does this for a living can't help but cry every time he has to go through the crimes that we committed against Jews. But hey, it's all good because Brian says so. Okay, well, let's try again the Jewish virtual library. I'm sure this article is the one that clears you. Obviously, your whole theory got cleared in Portugal, so congratulations if you're from Portugal, but I think you're from Ireland or Scotland or someplace. The Inquisition was a Roman Catholic tribunal for discovery and punishment of heresy, which was marked by the severity of questions and punishment and lack of rights afforded to the accused. While many people associate the Inquisition with Spain and Portugal, it was actually instituted by Pope Innocent III in Rome. A later Pope, Gregory IX, would establish the actual Inquisition in 1233 to combat the heresy of the Albigenses, a religious sect in France. By 1255, the Inquisition was in full force throughout Central and Western Europe, although it was never instituted in England or Scandinavia. So at least the Druids never had to go through this, huh? Anyway, initially a tribunal would open in a location and an edict of grace would be published, calling for those who are conscious of heresy to confess. After a period of grace, the tribunal officers would then make accusations. Those accused of heresy were sentenced by an act of faith. Oh, yay. Clergymen would then sit in the proceedings and they would deliver their punishments. The punishments included confinement, dungeons, torture, physical abuse. Those who reconciled with the church were still punished. They were still punished. Oops. And many had their property confiscated, as well as they were banished from public life. Those who never confessed, on the other hand, let's see what happened to them, I wonder, were burned at the stake without strangulation. That means they were burned alive, you jerk. You idiot. You shill. Okay. In the beginning, the Inquisition only dealt with Christian heretics, so you were right there, and did not interfere with the affairs of Jews. However, by 1242, the pretext had fallen away, and now it was a time to go after the Jews. The Inquisition specifically condemned the Talmud and burned thousands of volumes. Oh, book burning. Another bonfire of the vanities for us. Woo-hoo. And in 1288, the first mass burning of Jews at stakes took place in France. A mass burning of Jews. Of Jewish people burnt at the stake. As can be read about it by books chronicling history at that time. In 1481, the Inquisition started in Spain and ultimately surpassed the medieval Inquisition in both scope and intensity, as conversos and new Christians were targeted because of their close relationship to the Jewish community, many of whom were Jews in name alone. Jaha? But fear of Jewish influence led Queen Isabella and Ferdinand to write a petition to the Pope to ask permission to legitimize the Inquisition. And in 1483, well, you can guess what happened there. Anyway, this just goes on and on and on. There's pages of this. Okay. But that is not the end of this video. Okay, Brian. Maybe you're right. Maybe hearing those numbers by themselves, when you then think of the Holocaust or you think about the Trail of Tears with Native Americans, maybe those numbers don't mean anything to you. But what about this? Does this mean something to you? Here's a list of names of people who were affected. Oh, it just goes on and on and on, by the way. These are all family names, and it tells you how many family members and where and who and what, and you can just figure it out. Oh, this just keeps going. This doesn't end, by the way. This just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. Let's see. How many How many people were affected by this? How many? How many, Brian? How many of these until it's a tragedy? 5 of these? 10 of these? 100 of these? 1,000 of these? 100,000? Do we have to get to all 300,000 before you give a shit? Do we? Okay. But maybe that's not enough for you. You know, being Canadian and all, I hear they're not very friendly. Maybe you need some personal stories. So let's talk about Clara Sancho Alvin, Jewish, from Santa Maria la Barca, from 1447. She was the woman of a house. Okay, but maybe, okay. How about this? How about Samuel Abloufud? And this is from 1485. And this is a Jew who converted and used the name David Gomez de Utria and Diego Martinez de Ortega. Okay, maybe that's again not personal enough for you. How about Samuel Abloufud in 1485? He owned 2 houses. He was a Jew. These are the words that they're using in this document, by the way, who used the name of Diego Gomez. What about Albano Gonzalo, a converso? This guy converted, so at least he lived. In 1476, he was a silk dealer. You want to own silk? So some silversmiths. Do silversmiths count as a tragedy, or because they had silver, is that a problem? Let's see here. We got a rabbi. I wonder what happened to him. I wonder what happened to a rabbi in the Inquisition who didn't leave and didn't convert. Anyway, what about a tailor? Does a tailor count as a tragedy for you? This is probably going to be a 2-parter.